Next time we'll continue with this, but I want to end today by sharing a story with you. A story about the person who, to me, more than anyone else, captures what a benefit finder is. A person who's my role model when it comes to focusing also on the good. My grandmother was born in 1915 in Sighet, Romania. She had a very regular childhood. She was the youngest daughter of 7, one more sister, 5 more brothers, and they were doing well. Many of her brothers became important rabbis, violinists, musicians, and she was a young girl, happy, living the normal life until 1940, which was when Hitler invaded Romania. Hitler invaded Romania and her life changed radically. Her entire family was taken to one concentration camp after the other, ending up in Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, she had over a dozen nieces and nephews were all murdered. Her 5 brothers and parents were murdered in front of her very eyes. At the end of the war, somehow she and her sister survived. The British came to Auschwitz to liberate the prisoners. And when they came in with a doctor, and the doctor would go through the prisoners. Most of them were, of course, dead. Those who were alive, he would say, take that person, leave that person here, because they had limited resources, limited places. Those prisoners whom they thought would not survive, they left them there. And he comes to my grandmother, who weighed at the time 26 kilos, which is 54 pounds. My grandmother was a large woman, 54 pounds, and said, leave. And then he saw her sister, who was right next to her, who weighed 36 kilos, 79 pounds, and he said, he made this motion to put her on the truck. And of course she was too weak to get up, so the British soldiers picked up my grandmother's sister. His name was Shindy. They picked Shindy up, and Shindy held on to her sister, and she wouldn't let go. And they tried to open her grip, and even though she was weak and sick, they couldn't open her grip. So the doctor said, fine, take them both. So they took them both, and they put them on the truck, and they were, of course, certain that my grandmother would die. A month passed, and she survived, though she didn't put on a single gram. Any day they thought she would die, but she refused to die. After 3 months, she started putting on weight. She survived. 6 months later, she went back to Sighet to see what remained from her home. She arrived there, got off the cart with the horse, and a man by the name of Joseph, Yossi, saw her. And he saw a woman who was stooped, who was skinny, who still had no hair, but he recognized those eyes, because those eyes were proud, and those eyes were alive, and he recognized Goldie. And he took her with him, and 2 weeks later they got married. And Goldie got better, and got pregnant, and gave birth to a stillborn. And she got pregnant again, and once again gave birth to a stillborn. They made their way to Tel Aviv from Romania, and they were caught by the British. There was a British mandate at that time. They were caught by the British and sent back to a concentration camp in Cyprus. And there, in the concentration camp, my grandmother in Cyprus had another baby, a baby girl, who survived. And then they had another boy who was stillborn, and my grandmother could have no more children. Her body had just endured too much. My grandmother survived and thrived, as did Shindi. Shindi could have no children, but my mother was her child too, and I was her grandchild as well. And I remember this was in October of 1988. Shindi had passed away a few years earlier, and we went to the cemetery on the day that she passed away to say some prayers over her tombstone. And I went with my grandmother, and we walked there, and my grandmother stood in front of the tombstone, and on the tombstone were engraved not just Shindi's name, but the name of all the brothers and her parents. And she looked at the tombstone and started to talk to Shindi and said to her, "We're so fortunate, aren't we? We're so lucky, aren't we? Look, Talik is here." She called me Talik. And then she told her what I was doing, and she told her what my brother and sister were doing, their grandchildren, and about my mother and father and how wonderful things were. And she was talking about the wonderful things, and she was crying once in a while, missing Shindi. She was so human, just standing there and talking half in Yiddish, half in Hebrew, once in a while talking to me and to her sister who saved her life. And then she said to me, "Let's go." And we walked together, thousands of tombs around us. We walked along the path toward the car. It was a beautiful October day. The sun was out, the wind was blowing. The trees were swaying, and she suddenly stopped. She stopped and looked up, and she stood so proud, so poised, and she held my hand so tight, looking up and then looking at me. She said, "Tal, it's such a beautiful world. Just a pity we have to leave." And she smiled, and we walked. My grandmother saw thousands of corpses. She saw her family murdered in front of her very eyes. She had 3 stillborn children. She did not ignore the terrible things in life. How could she? However, at the same time, she also refused to ignore the good things in life, the wonderful things in life. And she was grateful, and she survived. My grandmother told me that this is a beautiful world. I believe her. Thank you.